Imagine you're standing in a crowded room. Someone insults you, or perhaps a colleague undermines your work. Your heart races, your mind spins with anger or self-doubt. What happens next? Do you react impulsively, throwing your emotions into the situation? Or do you pause, take a deep breath, and choose a response that aligns with your deepest values? In the modern world, we are constantly bombarded by triggers, stress, negativity, failure. Our first instinct is often to react, to let our emotions dictate the terms. But what if this very instinct is what's holding us back? What if true power lies not in reacting, but in mastering how we respond? In this journey, we'll explore the ancient wisdom of Stoicism, the psychological insights into human behavior, and the existential truths that challenge us to take control of our emotional responses. It's time to stop being victims of our emotions. It's time to respond like a Stoic. Picture this. You're sitting in traffic, already running late for an important meeting. The car in front of you suddenly brakes for no apparent reason. Your hands clench the steering wheel. Your jaw tightens. Heat rises in your chest, and before you know it, you're honking your horn with unnecessary aggression, perhaps even shouting at a stranger who can't hear you. This moment, this split second between stimulus and response, is where most of us lose ourselves. It's where we reveal the fragility of our emotional foundations and demonstrate what the ancient Stoics understood as the fundamental weakness of unexamined reaction. We live in a world of triggers. Every day we encounter situations that seem designed to test our composure. The colleague who takes credit for our work, the friend who cancels plans at the last minute, the technology that fails precisely when we need it most. These moments arrive without warning, and in them we face a choice that most of us don't even realize we're making. The choice is this: will we react or will we respond? The difference between these two approaches is profound, though it may seem subtle at first glance. A reaction is immediate, emotional, and often regrettable. It springs from our most primitive impulses, the fight-or-flight mechanism that served our ancestors well when facing physical threats, but serves us poorly in the complex social and professional landscapes of modern life. A response, on the other hand, is considered intentional and aligned with our deeper values. It emerges from a place of strength rather than weakness, wisdom rather than impulse. Consider the last time someone criticized your work. Did you immediately feel defensive? Did you start formulating counter-arguments before they had even finished speaking? Or perhaps you felt that familiar sting of wounded pride, followed by the urge to either retreat or attack. These are natural human reactions, but they are also manifestations of what the Stoics called weak judgments, automatic emotional responses that we've never examined or questioned. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while managing the vast Roman Empire, understood this struggle intimately. He reminded himself daily that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't writing for posterity. He was writing to himself, struggling with the same human tendency toward reactive emotion that we all face. The trigger of weakness lies not in the external event itself, but in our untrained response to it. When someone cuts us off in traffic, the weakness isn't in their poor driving, it's in our choice to let their actions dictate our emotional state. When we receive harsh feedback, the weakness isn't in the criticism, it's in our inability to separate our sense of self-worth from external opinions. This is perhaps the most liberating realization in all of philosophy. Events themselves are emotionally neutral. A rainstorm is neither good nor bad. It simply is. A criticism is neither devastating nor irrelevant. It simply is. The emotional charge we assign to these events comes entirely from us, from the stories we tell ourselves about what they mean and how they affect us. But here's what makes this realization both liberating and challenging. If we are the source of our emotional reactions, then we are also responsible for them. We can no longer blame our bad mood on traffic, our anxiety on work pressure, or our anger on other people's behavior. The buck stops with us, in the sovereignty of our own minds. This responsibility might feel overwhelming at first. Many of us have spent years, perhaps decades, living as emotional victims of circumstance. We've developed elaborate narratives about how the world affects us, how certain people make us feel certain ways, how specific situations cause our stress or happiness. Accepting responsibility for our emotional state means dismantling these narratives and acknowledging a more complex truth. We are not passive recipients of emotional experience, but active participants in creating it. The ancient Stoics understood that this realization is the first step toward emotional freedom. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before becoming one of history's most influential philosophers, taught his students to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not up to us. This simple distinction forms the foundation of all Stoic practice and the antidote to weak reactions. What is up to us? Our judgments, our choices, our responses, our values, our character. What is not up to us? Nearly everything else. Other people's behavior, the weather, the economy, the past, the future, our reputation, our health, and ultimately, most of the external circumstances of our lives. When we try to control what is not up to us, we set ourselves up for frustration, anger, and disappointment. When we focus our energy on what is up to us, we discover a realm of genuine power and influence. This shift in focus is not merely philosophical, it's profoundly practical. Imagine approaching that traffic jam with this understanding. The delay is not up to you, but your response to it is. The behavior of other drivers is not up to you, but your emotional state is. The fact that you might be late is not entirely up to you, but how you handle that lateness with grace or with stress absolutely is. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice. It means choosing our battles wisely and fighting them from a position of inner strength rather than reactive weakness. It means developing what we might call response ability, the ability to choose our responses rather than being controlled by them. The trigger of weakness, then, is not the external provocation, but our unconscious habit of reacting without reflection. Every moment of provocation is actually an opportunity, an invitation to practice the kind of strength that the Stoics called virtue. But to accept this invitation, we must first become aware that we're receiving it. Sarah stares at her phone screen, reading the email for the third time. Her boss has rejected her proposal again. The familiar cascade begins. First, the sharp intake of breath, then the heat rising in her cheeks, followed by the racing thoughts of everything she should have said differently. Within minutes, she's spiraled into a mental storm of self-doubt, resentment, and anxiety about her future at the company. By evening, Sarah has snapped at her partner, stress-eaten her way through a bag of chips, and spent 2 hours scrolling social media instead of working on the revised proposal. The original setback, 10 minutes of reading and processing, has consumed her entire day and affected everyone around her. This is the true cost of emotional chaos. It never stays contained. When we allow weak reactions to govern our responses, we don't just experience a momentary upset. We initiate a cascade of consequences that ripple through every aspect of our lives. Like a stone thrown into still water, a single uncontrolled emotional reaction creates expanding circles of disruption that can last hours, days, or even years. The ancient Stoics understood this phenomenon intimately. Seneca, in his letters to his friend Lucilius, wrote extensively about how unchecked emotions compound suffering. He observed that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality, creating elaborate mental scenarios of doom based on single moments of adversity. What begins as a simple external event becomes, through our reactive thinking, a complex internal drama that consumes our peace and clarity. Modern neuroscience has validated what the Stoics intuited. Emotional reactivity literally changes our brain chemistry. When we experience intense negative emotions, our bodies flood with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals, designed for short-term survival responses, wreak havoc when they become chronic residents in our system. Consider the physiology of a typical reactive episode. Your boss sends a critical email. Within milliseconds, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, has triggered a stress response. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense. Cortisol floods your bloodstream, temporarily shutting down non-essential functions like digestion and immune response, while heightening your focus on the perceived threat. In a life or death situation, this response could save your life. But your boss's email, while unpleasant, poses no physical danger. The crisis response system that evolution designed to help you escape from predators is now being triggered by PowerPoint presentations and performance reviews. Your body is preparing for a physical battle while you sit in an office chair, creating a fundamental mismatch between your biological response and your actual circumstances. The immediate cost is clear: stress, anxiety, physical tension, clouded judgment. But the hidden costs are far more significant. Chronic emotional reactivity literally rewires your brain, making you more sensitive to future triggers and more likely to default to reactive patterns. Each time you respond to stress with emotional chaos, you strengthen the neural pathways that make such chaos more probable in the future. This is what psychologists call emotional hijacking, the moment when our rational, thoughtful mind gets overwhelmed by our emotional, reactive mind. During these episodes, we lose access to our higher cognitive functions. We can't think clearly, make good decisions, or respond appropriately to complex situations. We become, in essence, temporarily less intelligent. The social costs are equally devastating. Emotional reactivity is contagious. When we're in a state of emotional chaos, we spread that chaos to everyone around us. Our families bear the brunt of our displaced frustrations, our colleagues walking on eggshells around our unpredictable moods. Our friendships suffer as we become less pleasant to be around, more likely to take offense, and less capable of offering support to others. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in Nazi concentration camps, observed that even in the most extreme circumstances, people retained the freedom to choose their response. He watched fellow prisoners who maintained their dignity and compassion despite unimaginable suffering, and others who, in much less severe circumstances, became bitter and cruel. The difference wasn't in their external situations, but in their internal responses to those situations. Frankl's insight reveals perhaps the cruelest irony of emotional reactivity. We often create more suffering for ourselves than our actual circumstances warrant. A harsh word from a colleague becomes a week of rumination. A social awkwardness becomes months of self-consciousness. A professional setback becomes years of diminished confidence. We take temporary external events and convert them into permanent internal states. The financial costs of emotional chaos are also real and measurable. Studies show that emotionally reactive employees are less productive, more likely to make mistakes, and more prone to burnout. They take more sick days, have higher healthcare costs, and are more likely to leave their jobs. The inability to manage emotional responses literally costs money, both personally and organizationally. But perhaps the greatest cost of emotional chaos is the opportunity cost, what we miss when we're caught in reactive spirals. While Sarah spent her evening in stress and rumination, she could have been creating, connecting, learning, or growing. The hours we lose to emotional reactivity are hours we can never recover. The relationships damaged by our uncontrolled responses may never fully heal. The opportunities missed while we were too caught up in our emotional dramas to see them clearly represent the real tragedy of weak reactions. The Stoics had a term for this. They called it adding suffering to suffering. The original event, the criticism, the setback, the disappointment, is often brief and manageable. But our reactive response to that event can create weeks or months of additional suffering that serves no constructive purpose. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Today I escaped anxiety." Or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. This wasn't positive thinking or denial. It was a recognition that much of our suffering is self-created and therefore self-controllable. The cost of chaos is not just personal, it's generational. When we model emotional reactivity, we teach our children that this is how humans respond to adversity. We pass down patterns of weak reactions that may persist for generations. Conversely, when we learn to respond with strength and wisdom, we give our children, and everyone we encounter, a different model of what's possible. The question then becomes, if the cost of emotional chaos is so high, why do we continue to pay it? The answer lies in our lack of awareness and our absence of alternative strategies. Most of us have never been taught that there's another way to respond to life's challenges. We've never been shown what emotional strength looks like in practice, but awareness is the first step toward change. Once we truly understand the cost of chaos, not just intellectually but viscerally, we become motivated to seek a different path. And fortunately, that path exists. It has been walked by countless individuals throughout history who discovered that there is indeed another way to live, another way to respond, another way to be human in the face of difficulty. James refreshes his email for the 15th time in an hour. The client hasn't responded to his proposal yet, and with each passing minute, his anxiety grows. He checks his phone, crafts several follow-up messages that he deletes before sending, and finds himself unable to focus on anything else. In his mind, he's already planning what he'll say if they reject his proposal, how he'll salvage the relationship, what he'll do if this deal falls through. What James doesn't realize is that he's attempting to control something that was never within his power to control, another person's decision-making process. He's expending enormous mental and emotional energy on an outcome that is entirely beyond his influence. This is the illusion that governs most of our suffering. The belief that we have far more control over our circumstances than we actually possess. We live as if we can control the weather by worrying about it, change other people's opinions by arguing with them, and guarantee outcomes by obsessing over them. We exhaust ourselves trying to manage variables that were never ours to manage, then wonder why we feel so powerless and frustrated. The ancient Stoics identified this as the fundamental error in human thinking. Epictetus, teaching in his school in Nicopolis nearly 2,000 years ago, drew a simple but revolutionary distinction. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This might seem obvious, even simplistic, but the implications of truly understanding this distinction are profound and life-changing. What we typically think we control, our reputation, other people's reactions, the outcomes of our efforts, our health, our financial success, exists largely outside our sphere of influence. What we rarely recognize we control, our judgments, our responses, our values, our character, constitutes our only real power in this world. This misunderstanding of control is not merely philosophical, it's psychological and practical. When we try to control the uncontrollable, we set ourselves up for chronic frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. We become like someone trying to steer a car by shouting at the road, wondering why they're not getting where they want to go. Consider the modern obsession with controlling outcomes. We live in a culture that promises us incredible agency over our lives. We're told that with enough effort, planning, and positive thinking, we can achieve anything we want. This message, while inspiring, is also fundamentally misleading. It suggests that failure is always a result of insufficient effort or improper technique, rather than acknowledging the role of factors beyond our control. An entrepreneur can have the best business plan, work 18-hour days, and make every right decision according to the best available information, and still fail because of market conditions, timing, or simple bad luck. A student can study diligently and still perform poorly on a test because they're having an off day or the test covers material they hadn't anticipated. A parent can do everything right and still watch their child make destructive choices. The belief that we control outcomes leads to what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. When we succeed, we attribute it to our skill and effort. When we fail, we either blame external circumstances or assume we didn't try hard enough. When others succeed, we often attribute it to luck. When others fail, we assume they didn't work hard enough. This inconsistent attribution keeps us trapped in the illusion that control is simply a matter of trying harder. But here's what the Stoics discovered. True control lies not in managing outcomes, but in mastering responses. We cannot control whether our business succeeds, but we can control the effort, integrity, and wisdom we bring to it. We cannot control whether people like us, but we can control whether we're worthy of being liked. We cannot control whether we get sick, but we can control how we respond to illness. This shift in focus from outcomes to responses is liberating in a way that's difficult to appreciate until you experience it. When James finally stops refreshing his email and instead focuses on preparing excellent work for his next client, he regains his power. When Sarah stops ruminating about her boss's reaction and instead focuses on improving her proposal, she reclaims her agency. The illusion of control manifests in countless ways throughout our daily lives. We try to control traffic by getting angry at it. We try to control other people's moods by walking on eggshells around them. We try to control the future by worrying about it. We try to control the past by ruminating about it. All of these efforts are not just futile, they're counterproductive, creating stress and anxiety while solving nothing. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the ancient world, understood the limits of control better than most. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. This wasn't the wishful thinking of someone who had never faced real challenges. It was the hard-won wisdom of a man who had dealt with plague, war, betrayal, and personal loss while managing an empire. The Stoic understanding of control is not passive resignation. It's not about giving up on goals or accepting injustice. It's about directing our energy where it can actually make a difference. When we stop wasting effort on the uncontrollable, we have much more energy available for what we can actually influence. A practical example: imagine you're stuck in traffic on your way to an important meeting. You cannot control the traffic, the other drivers, or whether you'll be late. Spending mental energy on these uncontrollables creates stress without solving anything. But you can control your response to the situation. You can call ahead to let people know you might be late. You can use the time to prepare mentally for the meeting. You can practice staying calm under pressure. You can even choose to see this as an opportunity to practice patience. This shift from outcome control to response control is perhaps the most practical wisdom philosophy has to offer. It's the difference between being a victim of circumstances and being an agent of your own character. It's the difference between feeling powerless and recognizing your true power. The illusion of control is so persistent because it feels empowering to believe we can manage everything. It seems like giving up control would make us helpless. But the opposite is true. The illusion of control makes us helpless because it directs our efforts toward the impossible. Accepting what we cannot control frees us to focus on what we can. This doesn't mean we become passive or stop trying to influence outcomes. It means we understand the difference between influence and control. We can influence many things: our health through good habits, our relationships through kindness, our careers through excellent work. But we cannot control the ultimate outcomes of these influences. Understanding this distinction allows us to give our best effort without being destroyed when that effort doesn't guarantee the results we wanted. The path to emotional strength begins with this fundamental recognition. Most of what we think we control, we don't. And most of what we can actually control, we've been ignoring. Once we align our efforts with this reality, we stop fighting the impossible and start exercising our real power. We stop being victims of circumstance and become architects of our character. Maria sits in the oncologist's office, the words "metastatic cancer" hanging in the air like a fog she cannot clear. Her first instinct is to fight, not the disease, but the reality of it. This can't be happening, she thinks. This isn't fair. I eat well, I exercise, I've done everything right. For weeks she rages against the diagnosis, researching alternative treatments, seeking second opinions, desperately trying to find a way to make this not be true. But the cancer doesn't care about her protests. Her resistance to the reality of her situation only adds psychological suffering to her physical pain. It's only when Maria finally accepts her diagnosis, not giving up hope for treatment, but accepting the reality of what she's facing, that she finds the strength to fight effectively. Acceptance doesn't make her passive, it makes her powerful. This is the paradox that confounds most people. Acceptance is not surrender. It's the foundation of all genuine strength. We've been conditioned to believe that acceptance means giving up, that acknowledging difficult realities is tantamount to defeat. But the ancient Stoics understood something that modern culture often misses. Resistance to reality doesn't change reality, It only multiplies our suffering. Epictetus taught his students a revolutionary concept. Don't demand that things happen as you wish. Instead, wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. This wasn't advice to become passive or pessimistic. It was an instruction in the art of working with reality rather than against it. The Stoics called this principle amor fati, literally love of fate. It's perhaps the most misunderstood concept in all of philosophy. People imagine it means being happy about every terrible thing that happens, celebrating suffering, or adopting a naive optimism about life's challenges. But amor fati is far more sophisticated and practical than that. To love your fate doesn't mean to love everything that happens to you. It means to love the opportunity that every situation, pleasant or unpleasant, gives you to practice virtue, to grow stronger, to become more than you were. It means recognizing that your character is forged not in comfort, but in challenge, not in getting what you want, but in responding wisely to what you get. Consider the difference between two responses to job loss. Person A spends months angry about the unfairness of it, bitter toward their former employer, resistant to the reality of their situation. They burn through their savings while refusing to consider jobs they deem beneath them, waiting for their old position to somehow reappear. Person B immediately accepts the reality of their unemployment, grieves the loss briefly, then channels their energy into networking, skill development, and exploring new opportunities. Which person is more likely to find meaningful work quickly? The difference isn't optimism versus pessimism, it's acceptance versus resistance. Person B isn't happy about losing their job, but they accept the reality of it and work within that reality. Person A wastes enormous energy fighting what has already happened, energy that could be used to create a better future. This principle applies to every area of life. We can accept that our bodies age while still taking care of our health. We can accept that relationships sometimes end while still investing fully in the ones we have. We can accept that we'll face setbacks in pursuing our goals while still working diligently toward those goals. Acceptance is not passive. It's the prerequisite for effective action. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot heal from a wound you won't admit exists. You cannot improve a situation you're too busy resisting to understand clearly. The power of acceptance becomes even more apparent when we consider the alternative, the exhausting futility of resistance. When we resist reality, we're essentially arguing with what has already happened. We're demanding that the past be different, that other people be different, that the world operate according to our preferences rather than its own laws. This resistance shows up in countless ways throughout our daily experience. We resist traffic jams, as if our frustration could somehow make the cars move faster. We resist other people's opinions, as if our irritation could change their minds. We resist aging, as if our denial could stop time. We resist failure, as if our shame could retroactively improve our performance. All of this resistance accomplishes nothing except adding psychological suffering to whatever practical challenges we face. It's like being caught in quicksand and struggling. The struggle itself makes the situation worse. Seneca, writing from his experience as both a wealthy advisor to emperors and later as an exile stripped of his possessions, understood this principle intimately. He wrote, "Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks the truth turns from the new to the eternal." He had learned that happiness comes not from external circumstances aligning with our preferences, but from aligning our responses with wisdom. The practice of acceptance doesn't mean we stop having preferences or goals. It means we hold those preferences lightly, understanding that our well-being doesn't depend on getting what we want. We can prefer health while accepting illness. We can prefer success while accepting failure. We can prefer comfort while accepting hardship. This nuanced relationship with preference and acceptance is what allows some people to maintain equanimity in the face of enormous challenges. They haven't given up on trying to improve their situations. They've given up on demanding that their situations be different than they are. Consider how this applies to relationships. We can accept that our partners have flaws while still encouraging their growth. We can accept that our children will make mistakes while still providing guidance. We can accept that our friends sometimes disappoint us while still valuing their friendship. Acceptance allows us to love people as they are rather than as we wish they were, which paradoxically creates more space for positive change than criticism or resistance ever could. The power of acceptance is ultimately the power of reality. When we accept what is, we align ourselves with truth rather than fighting against it. We stop wasting energy on impossible battles and focus on possible victories. We stop being victims of our circumstances and become students of them. This doesn't mean we become passive observers of our lives. It means we become active participants who understand the rules of the game. We can't control the cards we're dealt, but we can learn to play them skillfully. We can't control the weather, but we can dress appropriately. We can't control other people's behavior, but we can control our responses to it. Marcus Aurelius, facing plague and war and betrayal, wrote in his journal, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you." This wasn't resigned fatalism, it was active engagement with reality. He understood that strength comes not from getting what we want, but from making the best of what we get. The practice of acceptance begins with small things. Instead of cursing the rain, we can accept it and appreciate what it brings to the world. Instead of resenting a difficult colleague, we can accept them as an opportunity to practice patience. Instead of fighting insomnia, we can accept wakefulness as a chance for reflection or creativity. As we develop this capacity for acceptance in small matters, we build the strength to face larger challenges with equanimity. We discover that acceptance doesn't make us weak, it makes us anti-fragile, able to not just survive difficulties, but to be strengthened by them. David used to pride himself on his passion. When he cared about something, everyone knew it. His voice would rise, his gestures would become animated, his emotions would fill the room. He saw this as authenticity, as being real in a world of fake pleasantries. But gradually, he began to notice the pattern. His passionate outbursts rarely convinced anyone, often damaged relationships, and left him feeling drained and regretful. The turning point came during a particularly heated argument with his teenage daughter about her curfew. As he watched tears well up in her eyes, he realized that his emotional intensity wasn't making him more persuasive or more authentic. It was making him less effective and less kind. In that moment, he understood that what he had called passion was often just uncontrolled reactivity, and that true strength might look quite different than he had imagined. This is the insight that transforms lives. Emotional strength is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of response. We live in a culture that often conflates emotional intensity with emotional authenticity, that mistakes reactive displays for passionate engagement. We've been taught to let it all out, to express ourselves, to be true to our feelings. But the ancient Stoics understood something that our modern culture has largely forgotten. Our feelings are not our masters, and authentic living doesn't require emotional chaos. Emotional strength is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in personal development. Many people imagine it means becoming cold, detached, or unfeeling. They picture someone who never gets excited, never feels sad, never experiences anger or fear. But this is not strength. It's emotional numbness, and it's neither possible nor desirable for most human beings. True emotional strength looks quite different. It's the capacity to feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings. It's the ability to experience anger without being driven to cruelty, to feel sadness without being overwhelmed by despair, to face fear without being paralyzed by anxiety. It's emotional fitness, not the absence of emotional weight, but the strength to carry it gracefully. Think of emotional strength like physical strength. A physically strong person isn't someone who never encounters heavy objects. It's someone who can lift heavy objects without injury. Similarly, an emotionally strong person isn't someone who never encounters difficult emotions. It's someone who can experience difficult emotions without being damaged or derailed by them. The development of emotional strength follows principles similar to physical fitness. Just as we build physical strength through progressive resistance training, we build emotional strength through progressively challenging our emotional responses. Every moment of provocation becomes an opportunity to practice. Every trigger a chance to grow stronger. This process begins with awareness, the recognition that we have a choice in how we respond to emotional triggers. Most people go through life unconsciously reacting to their emotions, never realizing that there's space between feeling and action, between impulse and response. The first step toward emotional strength is claiming that space and learning to inhabit it consciously. Consider the neuroscience behind this process. When we experience a strong emotion, our amygdala, the brain's alarm system, immediately triggers a cascade of physiological responses. Our heart rate increases, stress hormones flood our system, and our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking, temporarily goes offline. This is why we often say or do things in emotional moments that we later regret. But here's what recent research has shown. We can train ourselves to create a pause between trigger and response, allowing our prefrontal cortex to come back online before we act. This pause, sometimes just a few seconds, is where emotional strength lives. It's the difference between reacting from our most primitive impulses and responding from our highest wisdom. The Stoics developed numerous practices for cultivating this pause and strengthening our emotional responses. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people and challenging situations, mentally preparing himself to respond with virtue rather than reactivity. Seneca would practice voluntary discomfort, temporarily giving up luxuries to build resilience and reduce attachment to external circumstances. But perhaps the most practical Stoic technique for building emotional strength is what they called the discipline of perception. This involves questioning our initial emotional interpretations of events and looking for alternative, more balanced perspectives. When someone cuts us off in traffic, instead of immediately assuming malicious intent, we might consider that they could be having an emergency or simply made an honest mistake. When we receive criticism, instead of immediately feeling attacked, we might look for the valuable feedback hidden within the delivery. This practice doesn't require us to become naive or to ignore genuine problems. It requires us to become more accurate in our perceptions, less prone to the emotional distortions that cloud our judgment and derail our responses. It's the difference between emotional reactivity and emotional intelligence. The development of emotional strength also requires us to understand the difference between temporary emotions and permanent character. Our emotions are like weather. They come and go, change intensity, and are largely influenced by factors beyond our control. Our character, however, is like climate. It represents our consistent patterns of response over time, and it's entirely within our influence. When we're feeling angry, we are not an angry person. We're a person experiencing anger. When we're feeling anxious, we are not an anxious person. We're a person experiencing anxiety. This distinction might seem semantic, but it's profoundly practical. It reminds us that emotions are temporary experiences, not permanent identities, and that we always have the power to choose how we'll respond to whatever we're feeling. Building emotional strength also requires what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different emotional states and identify them accurately. Most people operate with a very limited emotional vocabulary, categorizing their experiences as simply good or bad, happy or sad, calm or stressed. But emotions are far more nuanced, and the more precisely we can identify what we're feeling, the more effectively we can respond to it. The person who can distinguish between frustration and rage, between concern and anxiety, between disappointment and despair, has many more options for response than the person who experiences all negative emotions as undifferentiated upset. Emotional granularity gives us choice, and choice is the foundation of strength. Perhaps most importantly, emotional strength requires practice. Like physical fitness, emotional fitness must be maintained through consistent effort. We can't expect to respond wisely to a major crisis if we haven't practiced responding wisely to minor annoyances. Every day offers opportunities to strengthen our emotional responses. The slow internet connection, the inconsiderate neighbor, the unexpected delay. The beautiful thing about building emotional strength is that it creates a positive feedback loop. The more we practice responding thoughtfully rather than reactively, the more confident we become in our ability to handle whatever life throws at us. This confidence, in turn, makes us less reactive to begin with. We become less easily triggered because we trust our ability to handle triggers skillfully. This is the promise of emotional strength, not a life without challenges, but the capacity to meet any challenge with wisdom, grace, and integrity. It's the foundation of all other strengths: professional effectiveness, relationship satisfaction, personal resilience, and meaningful contribution to the world. The journey toward emotional strength is not easy, and it's never complete. Even the most emotionally mature people continue to face situations that challenge their equanimity. But the effort is worthwhile because it leads to something invaluable: the freedom to be your best self, regardless of circumstances, the ability to respond to life from your highest wisdom rather than your most primitive impulses. As we complete this first act of our exploration, we've laid the foundation for transformation. We've seen the weakness of reactive emotion, understood the cost of emotional chaos, recognized the illusion of control, discovered the power of acceptance, and begun to glimpse what emotional strength might look like in practice. Now we're ready to explore how the ancient wisdom of Stoicism can provide practical tools for building this strength in our daily lives. Picture a compass that always points true north, regardless of magnetic interference, weather conditions, or rough terrain. This is what the ancient Stoics created when they identified the four cardinal virtues: an unwavering moral compass that could guide human behavior through any circumstance, any challenge, any storm life might bring. These virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, were not abstract philosophical concepts to be debated in academic halls. They were practical tools for living, forged in the furnace of real human experience and tested against the hardest challenges life could offer. In our journey from emotional reactivity to stoic strength, we need more than just an understanding of what's wrong with weak reactions. We need a positive vision of what strong responses look like in practice. We need a framework for action, a blueprint for character, a set of principles that can transform our daily choices from unconscious reactions into conscious expressions of our highest selves. The 4 Stoic virtues provide exactly this framework. They are not merely ideals to admire, but practical guidelines for every decision, every interaction, every moment of choice that defines our lives. Let's explore each virtue and discover how it can reshape our responses to life's inevitable challenges. Wisdom, Sophia, is the foundational virtue, the one that makes all others possible. But Stoic wisdom is not academic knowledge or intellectual cleverness. It's the practical understanding of how to live well, how to see situations clearly, and how to respond appropriately to whatever circumstances arise. Wisdom in the Stoic sense begins with self-knowledge, understanding our own strengths, weaknesses, motivations, and patterns of behavior. It includes the ability to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't, what we can control and what we can't, what will truly contribute to our well-being and what will merely provide temporary pleasure or distraction. Consider how wisdom transforms our response to criticism. The emotionally reactive person hears criticism and immediately feels attacked, defensive, or ashamed. Their response comes from ego, not wisdom. The person practicing Stoic wisdom pauses and asks, "Is there truth in this criticism that can help me improve? Is this person trying to help me or harm me? How can I respond in a way that serves both my growth and our relationship?" This doesn't mean accepting all criticism uncritically, but it means responding thoughtfully rather than defensively. Wisdom allows us to extract value from even poorly delivered feedback while maintaining our emotional equilibrium. Courage, fortitudo, is perhaps the most misunderstood virtue in our modern context. We often think of courage as the absence of fear or as dramatic acts of heroism. But Stoic courage is far more subtle and far more practical. It's the willingness to do what is right even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or unpopular. Courage shows up in small daily choices as much as in life-changing moments. It's the courage to have difficult conversations rather than avoiding conflict. It's the courage to maintain your principles when others compromise theirs. It's the courage to pursue meaningful goals despite the risk of failure. It's the courage to be vulnerable in relationships despite the risk of rejection. Most importantly for our purposes, courage is what allows us to break free from weak reactive patterns. It takes courage to pause when our emotions are screaming at us to react immediately. It takes courage to choose a thoughtful response when a reactive one would be easier. It takes courage to face our own emotional patterns honestly and work to change them. Think about the last time you chose not to respond to a provocative email immediately, instead taking time to craft a thoughtful reply. That pause required courage, the courage to sit with your initial emotional reaction without immediately acting on it. Justice, Dichotomy, in Stoic philosophy, extends far beyond legal fairness or social justice, though it includes both. Justice is about recognizing our fundamental interconnectedness with other human beings and acting in ways that honor that connection. It's about treating others with the respect and consideration we would want for ourselves. Justice transforms how we respond to difficult people. Instead of meeting rudeness with rudeness, justice calls us to respond with courtesy. Instead of responding to anger with anger, justice asks us to respond with understanding. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to set boundaries. It means setting boundaries with wisdom and compassion rather than with revenge or spite. A practical example. When someone cuts you off in traffic, justice reminds you that this person is someone's child, parent, or sibling, a fellow human being deserving of basic consideration, even when their behavior is inconsiderate. Justice doesn't require you to approve of their driving, but it does call you to respond without malice or the desire for revenge. Temperance, sophrosina, is the virtue of moderation and self-control. In our culture of extremes, extreme emotions, extreme consumption, extreme positions on every issue, temperance offers a different way of engaging with the world. Temperance governs not just our consumption of food, drink, or material goods, but our consumption of emotions, entertainment, information, and stimulation. It's the wisdom to know when enough is enough, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to speak and when to remain silent. In the context of emotional reactions, temperance is what allows us to feel our emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It's the ability to experience anger without being consumed by rage, to feel sadness without sinking into despair, to experience fear without being paralyzed by anxiety. Temperance also governs our response to success and pleasure. It helps us enjoy good fortune without becoming attached to it, celebrate achievements without becoming arrogant, and receive praise without needing it for our self-worth. These four virtues work together like the legs of a table. Each one supports and strengthens the others. Wisdom without courage remains merely academic. Courage without justice becomes reckless or cruel. Justice without temperance becomes self-righteous extremism. Temperance without wisdom becomes rigid rule-following rather than thoughtful moderation. The beauty of the virtue-based approach is that it gives us a positive framework for action rather than just a list of things to avoid. Instead of simply trying not to react emotionally, we can actively choose to respond wisely. Instead of just trying not to be cowardly, we can actively choose to be brave. Instead of just trying not to be selfish, we can actively choose to be just. Instead of just trying not to be excessive, we can actively choose to be temperate. This shift from avoiding negative behaviors to embodying positive virtues is transformational. It moves us from a defensive posture to an offensive one, from trying not to fail to actively working to succeed, from being defined by what we're against to being defined by what we're for. The Stoics understood that virtue is not a destination, but a practice. We don't achieve wisdom once and for all. We practice making wise choices daily. We don't become perfectly courageous. We practice acting courageously in each situation that calls for it. We don't attain perfect justice. We practice treating others with fairness and respect in each interaction. We don't achieve perfect temperance. We practice moderation in each moment of choice. This practice-based approach makes virtue accessible to everyone, regardless of their starting point. You don't need to be naturally wise to practice wisdom. You don't need to be naturally brave to practice courage. You don't need to be naturally fair-minded to practice justice. You don't need to be naturally moderate to practice temperance. Each challenging situation becomes an opportunity to practice virtue. Each difficult person becomes a chance to practice justice. Each fear-inducing circumstance becomes an opportunity to practice courage. Each temptation becomes a chance to practice temperance. Each complex problem becomes an opportunity to practice wisdom. The four virtues provide us with what psychologists call implementation intentions, specific guidelines for how to behave in specific situations. Instead of relying on willpower or hoping our emotions will guide us correctly, we have a clear framework for making choices that align with our highest values. When we face a challenging situation, we can ask ourselves, what would wisdom look like here? How can I respond courageously? What does justice require of me? How can I practice temperance? These questions shift our focus from our emotional reactions to our character choices, from what we're feeling to who we want to be. This is the practical power of the Stoic virtues. They transform every moment of challenge into a moment of opportunity, every difficulty into a chance for growth, every problem into a laboratory for character development. They give us a way to win even when we lose, to grow even when we're knocked down, to become stronger precisely because of the challenges we face. Robert sits in his office at 2 a.m., obsessively revising a presentation for the third time. His mind races through possible objections his colleagues might raise, imagining scenarios where his ideas are rejected, his competence questioned, his career trajectory derailed. He's spending enormous mental energy trying to control variables that are ultimately beyond his influence. Other people's opinions, their emotional states, their decision-making processes, even their attention levels during his presentation. Meanwhile, he's neglecting the one thing that is entirely within his control, the quality of his preparation and the integrity of his effort. By the time he gives his presentation, he's exhausted from trying to manage the unmanageable and hasn't adequately focused on what he could actually influence. This scenario illustrates one of the most common sources of human suffering: the misallocation of our mental and emotional energy toward things we cannot control while neglecting things we can. The Stoic principle known as the dichotomy of control is perhaps the most practical and immediately applicable wisdom in all of philosophy. It's elegantly simple in concept, yet revolutionary in application. Focus your energy only on what you can actually control and accept everything else with equanimity. Epictetus, who understood powerlessness intimately from his years as a slave, taught this principle with the authority of lived experience. He divided all of existence into two categories: what is up to us and what is not up to us. This distinction, he argued, is the foundation of all wisdom and the key to all tranquility. What is up to us? Our judgments, our decisions, our responses, our values, our character, our effort, our attention, our intentions. What is not up to us? Almost everything else. Other people's behavior, the outcomes of our efforts, our health, our reputation, the past, the future, natural disasters, economic conditions, other people's opinions of us. This might seem like a harsh restriction of our power, but it's actually the opposite. It's a clarification of where our real power lies. Most people spend their lives trying to control things that are fundamentally uncontrollable while neglecting to exercise control over the things that are entirely within their influence. Consider the profound liberation this principle offers. Right now, you might be worried about what someone thinks of you, but their opinion is not up to you, it's up to them. What is up to you is whether you're worthy of their good opinion, whether you treat them with respect and kindness, whether you act with integrity in your interactions with them. When you focus on what's up to you rather than what's up to them, you reclaim your power and peace of mind. The dichotomy of control doesn't mean we become passive about outcomes we care about. It means we understand the difference between influence and control. We can influence many things without controlling them. A teacher can influence their students' learning but cannot control it. A parent can influence their child's development but cannot control it. An employee can influence their career trajectory but cannot control it. Understanding this distinction allows us to give our best effort toward outcomes we care about without being devastated when those outcomes don't match our hopes. We can work diligently for a promotion while accepting that the decision ultimately lies with others. We can invest fully in a relationship while accepting that we cannot control another person's feelings or choices. This principle is particularly powerful when applied to emotional reactions. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you interpret and respond to what happens to you. You cannot control other people's behavior, but you can control whether their behavior dictates your emotional state. You cannot control whether you experience setbacks, but you can control whether those setbacks defeat you or strengthen you. Let's examine how this works in practice across different areas of life. In professional situations, you cannot control whether you get promoted, but you can control the quality of your work. You cannot control your boss's mood, but you can control your response to their mood. You cannot control market conditions, but you can control how well you prepare for different scenarios. You cannot control whether your ideas are accepted, but you can control how thoughtfully you present them. In relationships, you cannot control whether someone loves you, but you can control whether you're worthy of love. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how you treat others. You cannot control whether relationships last, but you can control the effort and kindness you bring to them. You cannot control other people's emotions, but you can control your emotional response to their emotions. In health and aging, you cannot control whether you get sick, but you can control many of the factors that influence your health. You cannot control aging, but you can control how you age. You cannot control your genetic predispositions, but you can control many of the lifestyle factors that influence how those predispositions express themselves. In financial matters, you cannot control market performance, but you can control your saving and spending habits. You cannot control economic downturns, but you can control how well you prepare for them. You cannot control your employer's financial decisions, but you can control your professional development and the value you provide. The practical application of this principle requires constant mindfulness. Our natural tendency is to worry about outcomes, to try to manage other people's reactions, to ruminate about things beyond our control. Breaking these habits requires conscious effort and repeated practice. One powerful technique is to regularly ask yourself, is this within my control or outside my control? When you find yourself anxious about something, pause and categorize it. If it's outside your control, practice accepting it. If it's within your control, focus your energy on taking appropriate action. Another useful practice is to reframe goals in terms of what you can control. Instead of, I want to get promoted, try, I want to do excellent work and develop the skills that make me promotable. Instead of, I want people to like me, try, I want to be the kind of person who is worthy of being liked. Instead of, I want my presentation to be well received, try, I want to prepare thoroughly and present with clarity and confidence. This reframing isn't just semantic. It's psychological. When our goals are framed in terms of what we can control, we feel more empowered and less anxious. We're no longer dependent on external validation or circumstances for our sense of success and self-worth. The dichotomy of control also provides a framework for evaluating whether our emotional reactions are proportionate and productive. If you're upset about something outside your control, that emotion is likely neither helpful nor justified. If you're concerned about something within your control, that concern can motivate appropriate action. This doesn't mean we become emotionally detached from outcomes we care about. It means we hold our preferences lightly while holding our principles firmly. We can prefer certain outcomes while not being dependent on them for our well-being. We can work toward goals while not being devastated if we don't achieve them. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful person in the ancient world, understood that even emperors are subject to forces beyond their control. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. This wasn't the observation of someone who had never faced real challenges. It was the hard-won wisdom of someone who had managed plague, war, and political intrigue while maintaining his philosophical principles. The relief that comes from truly understanding and applying the dichotomy of control is profound. So much of our mental energy gets wasted on worrying about things we cannot influence. When we redirect that energy toward things we can actually control, we become both more effective and more peaceful. This principle doesn't solve all of life's problems, but it provides a framework for approaching any problem with clarity and wisdom. It helps us distinguish between productive concern and useless worry, between appropriate effort and futile struggle, between healthy influence and unhealthy control. The dichotomy of control is ultimately about freedom. Freedom from the exhausting attempt to manage the unmanageable. Freedom from emotional dependence on external circumstances. Freedom to focus our finite energy on our infinite capacity for choosing wise and virtuous responses to whatever life brings our way. The email arrives at the worst possible moment. Lisa is already running behind schedule, dealing with a sick child and managing 3 competing deadlines. The message from her colleague is unnecessarily harsh, questioning her competence on a project she's poured her heart into. Her first impulse is immediate and overwhelming: fire back with equal harshness, defend herself aggressively, maybe even copy their supervisor to escalate the conflict. But something makes her pause. Instead of responding from her gut reaction, she asks herself a different question. What would courage look like here? What would justice require? How can I respond with wisdom and temperance? In that pause, everything changes. Her response, when it comes, is firm but respectful, addressing the substantive issues while maintaining the relationship. She chooses virtue over emotion, response over reaction. This is the daily practice of Stoicism, the moment-by-moment choice to respond from our highest principles rather than our immediate emotions. We live in a culture that often treats emotions as infallible guides to action. Follow your heart, we're told. Trust your gut. If it feels right, do it. But the Stoics understood something that modern culture often misses. Emotions are information, not instructions. They tell us something about our current state, but they don't necessarily tell us what we should do about it. Emotions are evolutionary tools designed for a world very different from the one we inhabit. Fear kept our ancestors alive when they faced physical predators, but it's less helpful when we're facing a performance review. Anger motivated our ancestors to defend their territory, but it's counterproductive when we're dealing with a difficult customer. Our emotional responses were calibrated for immediate physical threats, not for the complex social, professional, and personal challenges of modern life. This doesn't mean emotions are bad or that we should ignore them. It means we need to develop the capacity to feel our emotions without being controlled by them, to use emotional information without being used by it. We need to create space between stimulus and response, between feeling and action, between impulse and choice. The Stoic approach to emotional response is built on a simple but revolutionary idea. We can choose our responses based on virtue rather than emotion. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about this?" we can ask, "What does virtue require here?" Instead of reacting from our immediate emotional state, we can respond from our deepest values. Let's explore how each of the 4 virtues can guide our responses in challenging situations. Responding with wisdom means taking time to understand situations clearly before reacting. It means gathering information, considering multiple perspectives, and thinking through the likely consequences of different responses. Wisdom asks, what's really going on here? What don't I understand? What would the wisest response look like? When someone criticizes us, wisdom helps us separate the valid feedback from the poor delivery, the content from the tone, the helpful information from the personal attack. When we face a setback, wisdom helps us see it as information rather than catastrophe, as a course correction rather than a failure. Wisdom also means understanding our own patterns and triggers. If we know we tend to overreact to certain types of situations, wisdom prepares us for those moments and helps us respond more skillfully when they arise. Responding with courage means doing what's right even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or unpopular. It means having difficult conversations instead of avoiding them, setting boundaries instead of people-pleasing, pursuing our values instead of taking the easy path. Courage in daily life often looks like vulnerability rather than aggression. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, to ask for help when we need it, to say no when we're overcommitted, to express appreciation when we feel it. It takes courage to be authentic in a world that often rewards performance, to be kind when others are harsh, to remain calm when others are agitated. When someone treats us poorly, courage doesn't mean retaliating. It means responding in a way that honors our principles. When we face a challenge that scares us, courage doesn't mean feeling fearless. It means acting with integrity despite our fears. Responding with justice means considering the impact of our responses on others and on the broader community. It means treating people with fairness and respect, even when they don't treat us the same way. Justice asks, how can I respond in a way that honors the dignity of everyone involved? Justice doesn't mean being a pushover or failing to advocate for ourselves. It means advocating for ourselves in ways that don't diminish others, setting boundaries without cruelty, defending our positions without attacking the person who disagrees with us. When someone is rude to us, justice reminds us that they're probably struggling with something we don't understand. When we're in conflict with others, justice calls us to fight for what's right without demonizing those who disagree. When we have power over others, justice requires us to use that power responsibly. Responding with temperance means choosing moderation in our responses, avoiding extremes of emotion or action. It means not overreacting to small problems or underreacting to serious ones. Temperance asks, what's the appropriate level of response here? Temperance helps us match our response to the actual magnitude of the situation. When someone makes a minor mistake, temperance keeps us from responding as if they'd committed a major betrayal. When we receive good news, temperance keeps us from becoming overconfident or complacent. Temperance also governs the intensity and duration of our emotional responses. We can feel angry without staying angry all day, experience disappointment without letting it ruin our week, celebrate success without becoming arrogant. The Stoics developed a specific practice for implementing virtue-based responses called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils or adversities. This isn't about being pessimistic or expecting the worst. It's about mentally preparing ourselves to respond virtuously to likely challenges. Each morning, we might spend a few minutes thinking about the challenges we're likely to face that day and considering how we want to respond to them. If we know we have a difficult meeting, we can prepare ourselves to respond with wisdom and justice rather than defensiveness or aggression. If we know we'll be dealing with a challenging person, we can commit in advance to responding with patience and understanding. This mental preparation is like rehearsing for a performance. When the challenging moment arrives, we're not caught off guard by our emotional reactions. We've already considered what virtue looks like in this situation, and we're prepared to choose response over reaction. Another powerful practice is the pause. When we feel a strong emotional reaction arising, we can create a brief space before responding. This might be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths, counting to 10, or excusing ourselves for a moment. In that pause, we can remember our commitment to virtue and choose our response accordingly. The pause is particularly important in our digital age, where we can send emails, post on social media, or text messages instantaneously. The same emotional reaction that might have had time to cool in the era of handwritten letters can now be broadcast to the world in seconds. Creating artificial pauses, writing emails without sending them immediately, waiting before posting on social media, can save us from responses we'd later regret. The practice of responding with virtue rather than emotion doesn't eliminate our emotional experiences. If anything, it allows us to feel our emotions more fully, because we're not afraid of being controlled by them. When we know we can choose our responses, we can afford to experience our feelings without immediately acting on them. This approach also leads to better outcomes in most situations. Responses based on virtue tend to be more effective than responses based on emotion. They preserve relationships, solve problems more effectively, and align with our long-term interests rather than just our immediate impulses. Perhaps most importantly, choosing virtue over emotion allows us to maintain our integrity regardless of how others behave. We can be kind even when others are cruel, honest even when others are deceptive, calm even when others are agitated. Our character becomes independent of our circumstances, our principles unshakable regardless of external pressures. This is the profound freedom that comes from virtue-based living, the ability to be your best self regardless of what others do, to respond from your highest values no matter what emotions you're experiencing, to maintain your integrity even in the most challenging circumstances. Margaret sits in her car in the hospital parking lot, having just received her mother's diagnosis of early-stage dementia. The news she's been dreading for months has finally arrived, and with it comes a flood of emotions: grief, fear, anger, helplessness. But instead of being swept away by this emotional tsunami, she takes a deep breath and closes her eyes. She doesn't try to push away her feelings or pretend they don't exist. Instead, she observes them with gentle awareness, like watching clouds pass across the sky. "I'm feeling afraid," she acknowledges to herself. "I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling overwhelmed." She sits with these emotions, neither fighting them nor feeding them, until gradually she feels a deeper stillness emerge. Not the absence of feeling, but a steady presence that can hold all feelings without being destroyed by any of them. This is what the Stoics meant by inner peace, not the absence of disturbance, but the presence of an unshakable core that remains steady regardless of external circumstances. Inner peace is perhaps the most misunderstood goal in philosophy and psychology. Many people imagine it as a state of perpetual calm, a kind of emotional flatline where nothing ever bothers us. Others see it as a luxury available only to those who live sheltered lives, free from real challenges and responsibilities. But Stoic inner peace is neither emotional numbness nor naive optimism. It's something far more practical and achievable. True inner peace is the capacity to remain centered and grounded even in the midst of difficulty. It's the ability to experience strong emotions without being overwhelmed by them, to face uncertainty without being paralyzed by anxiety, to encounter loss without being destroyed by grief. It's not about avoiding life's storms, but about developing the inner stability to weather them with grace. The Stoics understood that peace comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from mastering our internal responses. Marcus Aurelius, dealing with plague, war, and political intrigue, wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." He found peace not by avoiding challenges, but by cultivating a mind that could remain steady in the face of any challenge. The foundation of inner peace is what the Stoics called prosochi, continuous attention to the present moment and to our own mental states. This is remarkably similar to what we now call mindfulness, though the Stoic version is specifically focused on virtue and wisdom rather than just awareness for its own sake. Stoic mindfulness begins with observing our thoughts and emotions without immediately identifying with them. Instead of thinking, "I am angry," we learn to think, "I am experiencing anger." Instead of, "I am anxious," we observe, "Anxiety is arising in my mind." This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in perspective, from being our emotions to having emotions, from being controlled by our mental states to observing them with some detachment. This practice of observation doesn't make us cold or unfeeling. It gives us space to choose how we want to respond to what we're feeling. When we're not completely identified with our emotions, we can experience them fully while still maintaining our capacity for wise action. The Stoics developed several specific practices for cultivating this inner observer and the peace that comes with it. The evening review was a daily practice where Stoics would reflect on the day's events, examining their responses and considering how they might have acted more in accordance with virtue. This wasn't self-criticism, but self-awareness, an honest assessment designed to promote growth rather than guilt. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "When the lamp is taken away and my wife has fallen silent, I examine the whole day and measure my actions and words, hiding nothing from myself and omitting nothing." This practice helped him maintain awareness of his patterns and progress in developing wisdom and virtue. Morning reflection involved preparing mentally for the day ahead, not by trying to control outcomes, but by committing to respond virtuously, regardless of what happened. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people, unexpected challenges, and various provocations, and he would prepare himself to meet them with patience, wisdom, and goodwill. The view from above was a meditation practice where Stoics would imagine viewing their current problems from a cosmic perspective. Marcus Aurelius would envision himself from the perspective of the stars, seeing his troubles as tiny and temporary parts of a vast universe. This practice wasn't about minimizing real problems, but about maintaining perspective and avoiding the tunnel vision that anxiety often creates. Present moment. Awareness involved regularly returning attention to the current moment rather than getting lost in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. The Stoics understood that suffering often comes not from present circumstances, but from our mental time travel, ruminating about what was or worrying about what might be. Modern neuroscience has validated many of these ancient practices. Regular meditation and mindfulness practice literally change the structure of the brain, strengthening areas associated with emotional regulation and weakening areas associated with anxiety and reactivity. The amygdala, our brain's alarm system, becomes less reactive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation, becomes stronger and more active. But Stoic peace practices go beyond general mindfulness. They're specifically designed to cultivate virtue and wisdom along with awareness. This gives them a practical, ethical dimension that pure mindfulness sometimes lacks. One particularly powerful Stoic practice is what we might call virtue checking. Regularly asking ourselves whether our current mental state is aligned with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. If we're feeling angry, we can ask, is this anger just? Is it proportionate? Is it leading me toward virtuous action or just toward venting? If we're feeling afraid, we can ask, what would courage look like here? How can I act wisely despite this fear? The cultivation of inner peace also requires what the Stoics called reserve clause, holding our plans and preferences lightly. Instead of saying, I will have a good day, we learn to say, I will have a good day, fate permitting. Instead of, this will work out well, we say, this will work out well, if that's in accordance with nature. This isn't pessimism, it's psychological preparation. When we hold our expectations lightly, we're less devastated when things don't go according to plan. We can prefer certain outcomes while not depending on them for our peace of mind. Inner peace, in the Stoic sense, is not passive but active. It's not about withdrawing from the world, but about engaging with it from a place of strength and stability. The person who has cultivated inner peace can take on greater responsibilities, face larger challenges, and serve others more effectively because they're not constantly depleted by emotional reactivity. This peace also becomes a gift to others. When we're centered and stable, we don't add to the chaos around us. We become a calming presence in stressful situations, a voice of reason in conflicts, a source of stability for those who are struggling. Our inner peace creates space for others to find their own peace. The journey toward inner peace is not about perfection, it's about progress. Even the most experienced practitioners of Stoicism continue to face situations that challenge their equanimity. The goal is not to never be disturbed, but to recover our balance more quickly when we are disturbed, to learn from each experience, and to gradually develop greater resilience and wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, writing his personal journal that became the Meditations, was clearly still working on these practices even late in his life. His writings reveal someone who struggled with the same human tendencies toward frustration, discouragement, and reactivity that we all face. But they also reveal someone who had developed remarkable tools for returning to peace, for finding meaning in difficulty, and for maintaining virtue in challenging circumstances. The promise of inner peace is not a life without problems, but the capacity to meet any problem with wisdom, grace, and strength. It's the freedom to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be chosen for, to maintain our highest selves regardless of what external circumstances we face. This is the deepest freedom available to human beings, the freedom to be at peace with ourselves and with reality, regardless of what that reality contains. It's a freedom that no external force can take away, that no circumstance can destroy, that grows stronger precisely through being tested by difficulty. David wakes up at 5:30 a.m., not because he has to, but because he's chosen to. Before checking his phone or rushing into the day's activities, he spends 10 minutes in quiet reflection, preparing his mind for whatever challenges and opportunities lie ahead. He reminds himself of his core values, commits to responding to difficulties with virtue rather than reactivity, and sets his intention to contribute positively to every interaction he has. Throughout his commute, instead of feeling frustrated by traffic, he uses the time for contemplation and gratitude. When a colleague criticizes his work in a meeting, he listens carefully for valid feedback while not taking the harsh tone personally. When his teenager comes home upset about friendship drama, he offers presence and wisdom rather than trying to fix or minimize her experience. When an unexpected bill arrives in the mail, he feels the initial worry but quickly shifts to practical problem solving without dramatic emotional spirals. This isn't perfection. David still faces moments of frustration, anxiety, and doubt, but he's developed the tools to work with these experiences skillfully, to learn from them, and to return to equilibrium more quickly. He's living the Stoic life, not free from human challenges, but free in his responses to them. Living the Stoic life means integrating philosophical principles so deeply into our daily experience that they become second nature, not rigid rules we follow, but wisdom we embody. It's the difference between knowing about Stoicism and living stoically, between understanding the theory and practicing the art. The transition from studying Stoicism to living it begins with recognizing that every moment offers an opportunity to practice virtue. Every interaction is a chance to practice justice, every challenge an opportunity to practice courage, every choice a moment to practice wisdom, every temptation a chance to practice temperance. Life becomes our training ground, and every experience, pleasant or unpleasant, becomes curriculum for our character development. This perspective transforms how we see difficulties. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we learn to ask, "How can this help me grow?" Instead of viewing obstacles as problems to be avoided, we see them as opportunities to develop resilience. Instead of seeing difficult people as sources of frustration, we see them as teachers of patience and understanding. Marcus Aurelius captured this beautifully when he wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This isn't positive thinking or denial of real problems. It's a recognition that our character is forged precisely through how we handle difficulties, not through avoiding them. Living stoically means developing daily practices that keep our philosophical principles active and accessible. These aren't just morning rituals, but ongoing habits that weave wisdom into the fabric of our days. Morning preparation. Each day begins with mental preparation. This might involve reading a brief passage from Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, or Epictetus. Admiral James Stockdale found himself in the darkest circumstances imaginable. shot down over North Vietnam, captured, tortured, and held in solitary confinement for years. Stripped of all external freedoms, facing daily physical and psychological abuse, he might have been expected to break. Instead, he drew upon the Stoic philosophy he had studied years earlier, particularly the teachings of Epictetus, and built what he would later call his inner fortress, an unassailable realm of mental freedom that no external force could touch. Years later, reflecting on his experience, Stockdale would say that his study of Stoicism wasn't just helpful, it was essential to his survival. While his body was imprisoned, his mind remained free. While his circumstances were unbearable, his inner citadel remained strong. He had discovered what the ancient Stoics knew, that our greatest power lies not in controlling external events, but in building an inner realm that cannot be conquered. This is the ultimate destination of our Stoic journey, the construction of an inner fortress that provides refuge, strength, and clarity regardless of what storms rage in the external world. The concept of the inner fortress isn't about withdrawal from life or emotional detachment from the world around us. It's about creating a core of stability within ourselves that allows us to engage more fully and effectively with life's challenges. It's the development of what psychologists now call psychological resilience, the capacity to maintain or quickly regain mental health during or after periods of adversity. But the Stoic inner fortress goes beyond mere resilience. It's not just about surviving difficulties, it's about maintaining our highest qualities of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, precisely when circumstances would naturally push us toward lesser responses. It's the capacity to remain kind when others are cruel, to stay calm when others panic, to think clearly when others are confused, to act ethically when others compromise their principles. The foundation of this inner fortress is the deep internalization of the principles we've been exploring. The understanding that our responses are always within our control, that virtue is the only true good, that external circumstances cannot determine our essential well-being, that every challenge is an opportunity to practice and strengthen our character. The architecture of inner strength. Building an inner fortress requires understanding its essential components. Like any strong structure, it must be built on solid foundations and reinforced through consistent maintenance. The foundation, core values. The bedrock of the inner fortress consists of clearly defined, deeply held values that remain constant regardless of external pressures. These aren't abstract ideals, but practical principles that guide daily decisions. For the Stoic, these values center on the four virtues, but they must be personalized and made specific to your life circumstances. What do you stand for when everything else is uncertain? What principles will you not compromise even under pressure? What kind of person do you want to be when no one is watching? These questions help define the unshakable foundation upon which everything else is built. The walls. Philosophical perspective. The walls of the inner fortress are built from philosophical understanding, the deep knowledge that your essential self cannot be harmed by external events. This includes the understanding that your worth doesn't depend on others' opinions, that your happiness doesn't require specific circumstances, that your integrity can be maintained regardless of how others behave. Epictetus, who knew imprisonment literally, taught that we are always free to choose our attitude, our response, our internal stance toward whatever we're experiencing. This perspective creates protective barriers around our essential self, allowing us to remain centered even when external circumstances are chaotic. The watchtower. Self-awareness. At the highest point of the inner fortress stands the watchtower of self-awareness. The capacity to observe our own thoughts, emotions, and reactions with clarity and objectivity. This internal observer allows us to recognize when we're being triggered, when our emotions are leading us astray, when we're falling into old patterns of reactivity. This isn't the harsh self-criticism that many people mistake for self-awareness, but a gentle, curious observation of our internal landscape. It's the difference between being caught in an emotional storm and watching that storm from a place of safety. The arsenal, practical tools. The inner fortress must be stocked with practical tools that can be deployed when challenges arise. These include breathing techniques for managing acute stress, reframing methods for changing perspective on difficult situations, philosophical exercises for maintaining clarity, and behavioral strategies for acting wisely even when feeling emotional. Marcus Aurelius filled his personal journal with such tools, reminders, perspectives, and practices that he could draw upon when facing the enormous pressures of ruling an empire during plague and war. His meditations serve as a blueprint for the kind of mental arsenal every person can develop. The daily practice of fortress building. The inner fortress isn't built overnight. It's constructed through daily practice, small choices, and consistent commitment to growth. Like physical fitness, philosophical fitness requires regular exercise to maintain and develop. Morning fortification. Each day begins with mental preparation. This might involve reading philosophical texts, practicing meditation, reviewing your core values, or simply setting intentions for how you want to respond to the day's challenges. The goal is to strengthen your connection to your deepest principles before the day's distractions and pressures begin. Midday maintenance. Throughout the day, regular check-ins help maintain fortress strength. This might be as simple as asking yourself, am I responding from my highest self right now? What would virtue look like in this situation? How can I use this challenge to grow stronger? Evening reflection. The day ends with honest assessment, not self-criticism, but thoughtful review of what went well, what could have been handled better, and what lessons can be learned. This practice helps identify weak points in your fortress that need reinforcement and strengths that can be further developed. Testing the fortress. The true test of the inner fortress comes not in comfortable circumstances, but in moments of genuine difficulty. When you receive devastating news, face betrayal from someone you trusted, encounter failure in something important to you, or deal with physical pain or illness, these are the moments when the fortress proves its worth. Stockdale discovered that his fortress was strongest precisely when external circumstances were worst. The same can be true for anyone who has built this internal strength. The more challenging the external situation, the more valuable the inner refuge becomes. But the fortress doesn't just provide protection, it provides power. When you're not afraid of being disturbed, you can take greater risks. When you're not dependent on external validation, you can act more authentically. When you're not controlled by circumstances, you can focus your energy on what truly matters. The expanding fortress. As the inner fortress grows stronger, something remarkable happens. It begins to extend its protection to others. The person who has developed unshakable inner peace becomes a source of calm for others. The person who has learned to respond with virtue becomes a model for others. The person who has built genuine inner strength becomes capable of supporting others in building their own strength. This isn't about becoming a teacher or guru. It's about the natural influence that comes from embodying the principles you've studied. Your steady presence in chaos, your kind response to cruelty, your calm reaction to provocation all serve as examples of what's possible for human beings. Marcus Aurelius understood this responsibility, writing, "What brings no benefit to the hive can bring none to the bee." The stronger your inner fortress, the more you can contribute to the strength and well-being of your community. The paradox of the fortress. The deepest paradox of the inner fortress is that the more secure you become within yourself, the more open you can be to others. The more protected your essential self, the more vulnerable you can afford to be in relationships. The stronger your inner foundation, the more risks you can take in pursuing meaningful goals. Security breeds generosity. Strength enables kindness. Inner peace creates space for others' struggles. The fortress doesn't make you isolated. It makes you free to connect more deeply with life and with others. Epictetus, despite his history of slavery and physical disability, became one of history's most influential teachers precisely because he had built an inner realm that no external circumstance could touch. His fortress wasn't a place of withdrawal, but a base of operations for contributing wisdom and strength to the world. Living from the fortress. Once established, the inner fortress becomes not just a refuge, but a way of life. Decisions are made from this place of strength rather than from fear or reactivity. Relationships are approached from security rather than neediness. Challenges are met from confidence rather than anxiety. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means you become capable of handling whatever difficulty arises. You don't avoid storms. You become someone who can navigate through any storm while maintaining your course and your character. The inner fortress is ultimately about freedom. The freedom to be your best self, regardless of circumstances. The freedom to respond rather than react. The freedom to maintain your principles even when it's difficult. It's the freedom that comes from knowing that your essential well-being cannot be touched by external events, that your worth doesn't depend on others' approval, that your happiness comes from within. This is the great gift of Stoic philosophy, not the promise of an easy life, but the tools to build an inner strength that can handle any life. Not the guarantee of favorable circumstances, but the capacity to respond wisely to any circumstances. Not the elimination of challenges, but the transformation of every challenge into an opportunity for growth. The inner fortress awaits your construction. The materials are available, the blueprints have been provided, and the only question remaining is whether you will commit to the daily work of building a strength that nothing external can destroy. When Nelson Mandela walked into Robben Island prison in 1964, he faced what many would consider insurmountable adversity. 27 years of hard labor, isolation from family, and the seeming impossibility of ever achieving his dream of a free South Africa. Yet he later described those prison years not as lost time, but as the crucible in which his character was forged and his leadership was developed. He used his captivity to study, to refine his philosophy, to build the mental and emotional strength that would later enable him to lead a peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy. Mandela's transformation illustrates a profound truth that the Stoics understood. Adversity isn't the enemy of growth. It's the necessary condition for growth. Without resistance, muscles atrophy. Without challenges, character weakens. Without difficulties, we remain forever children in our emotional and spiritual development. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive insight of Stoic philosophy. that our greatest growth comes not from our successes and pleasures, but from our failures and pains, that our strongest selves are forged not in comfort, but in difficulty, that what we typically see as obstacles are actually the raw materials from which strength, wisdom, and character are built. The Greek word the Stoics used for human flourishing was eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but meaning something deeper, the flourishing that comes from living according to our highest nature, from developing our potential, from becoming who we're capable of being. And the Stoics discovered that eudaimonia is achieved not by avoiding difficulty, but by meeting difficulty with virtue. This perspective revolutionizes how we relate to the inevitable challenges of human existence. Instead of seeing setbacks as proof that something is wrong with our lives, we can see them as confirmation that we're alive and growing. Instead of viewing obstacles as problems to be solved, we can see them as puzzles designed to develop our problem-solving abilities. Instead of experiencing failure as defeat, we can experience it as education. The alchemy of transformation. The process by which adversity becomes growth is like alchemy, the ancient practice of transforming base metals into gold. But this isn't magical thinking or naive optimism. It's a practical understanding of how human beings actually develop strength, resilience, and wisdom. Consider how this works in physical development. Muscles grow stronger only when they're challenged beyond their current capacity. The stress of resistance training creates tiny tears in muscle fibers, which then heal stronger than before. Without this stress, muscles remain weak. With too much stress too quickly, they break down. But with appropriate challenge, they become capable of handling greater loads. The same principle applies to emotional, mental, and spiritual development. Our capacity for handling stress increases only when we're appropriately challenged. Our emotional resilience develops only when we successfully navigate emotional difficulties. Our wisdom grows only when we encounter situations that require more wisdom than we currently possess. This doesn't mean we should seek out unnecessary hardship or be grateful for genuine suffering. It means we can learn to extract value from whatever hardships life naturally brings us, to use difficulties as opportunities for development rather than just enduring them passively. The 4 stages of adversity-driven growth. Understanding how adversity promotes growth helps us navigate difficult periods more skillfully. The process typically unfolds in 4 stages. Stage 1. Disruption. Every significant growth period begins with some form of disruption: the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, a health challenge, a financial setback, or any situation that disrupts our normal patterns and forces us to adapt. This disruption is initially uncomfortable because it challenges our existing ways of being and thinking. The natural response to disruption is often resistance. We want things to go back to the way they were, to return to our comfort zone, to make the difficulty go away. But this resistance prevents us from accessing the growth opportunities that disruption provides. Stage 2. Descent. When we can't immediately return to our previous state, we often experience a period of descent, confusion, discouragement, perhaps even despair. This is the dark night of the soul that spiritual traditions recognize as a necessary part of transformation. During this stage, our old ways of understanding ourselves and the world prove inadequate to our new circumstances. Our previous coping strategies don't work. Our familiar sources of meaning and identity are challenged. This can be profoundly disorienting, but it's also necessary. We must let go of what no longer serves us before we can develop something better. Stage 3. Exploration. As we accept that we can't go back to the way things were, we begin exploring new possibilities. We try different approaches, develop new skills, consider different perspectives, experiment with new ways of being. This stage requires courage because we're venturing into unknown territory without guarantees of success. This is where the Stoic virtues become essential guides. Wisdom helps us evaluate which new approaches might be most beneficial. Courage gives us the strength to try things that might not work. Justice keeps us connected to our values even as other things change. Temperance helps us avoid extremes as we experiment with new ways of living. Stage 4. Integration. Eventually, if we navigate the process skillfully, we reach a stage of integration where we've developed new capacities, new perspectives, new strengths that we didn't possess before the adversity began. We're not the same person who entered the difficulty. We're someone who has been transformed by it. This integration often brings a sense of gratitude for the very experience we initially resisted. We recognize that we couldn't have developed these new capacities without the challenge that forced us to grow. We see that the adversity was necessary for our development, even though it was painful. Learning from Stoic examples. The great Stoic philosophers provide powerful examples of this transformation process in action. Epictetus was born into slavery, experienced physical disability, and knew powerlessness intimately. Yet he used these experiences to develop a philosophy of freedom that has inspired millions. His understanding of what true freedom means, the freedom to choose our responses regardless of external circumstances, came directly from his experience of external bondage. Seneca experienced exile from Rome, the loss of his fortune, and eventually execution by a paranoid emperor. Yet he used these experiences to develop profound insights about the nature of wealth, the value of friendship, and the importance of living according to principle rather than external validation. Marcus Aurelius inherited enormous power, but also enormous responsibility during one of the most challenging periods in Roman history. He faced plague, war, betrayal, and personal loss while trying to govern justly. His meditations reveal someone who used these enormous pressures to develop remarkable wisdom about duty, acceptance, and the nature of human life. None of these men would have chosen their difficulties, but all of them used their difficulties to become more than they would have been without them. Their adversities became the raw materials for their wisdom, their challenges, the catalysts for their growth. Modern applications. This ancient wisdom has profound relevance for contemporary life. Every person faces setbacks, losses, failures, and disappointments. The question is not whether we'll encounter adversity, it's whether we'll use that adversity for growth or let it diminish us. Career setbacks can become opportunities to develop new skills, explore different paths, or clarify what truly matters to us. Relationship failures can teach us about communication, boundaries, and what we really need from partnership. Health challenges can motivate us to take better care of ourselves, to appreciate what we have, and to develop patience and acceptance. Financial difficulties can help us distinguish between wants and needs, develop resourcefulness, and build resilience. The key is developing what psychologists call a growth mindset, the belief that our abilities and understanding can be developed through effort and learning. This mindset allows us to see challenges as opportunities rather than threats, failures as learning experiences rather than defeats. The practice of obstacle as path. The Stoics developed specific practices for transforming obstacles into opportunities. Reframing. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" learn to ask, "How can this help me grow?" Instead of, "This is terrible," try, "This is difficult, and difficulty is how strength is built." Virtue. Focus. In any challenging situation, ask which virtues this circumstance is calling you to develop. Is it an opportunity to practice courage, patience, compassion, perseverance? When you focus on the character development opportunity, the external difficulty becomes secondary. Benefit finding. Look actively for ways the current challenge might benefit you in the long run. What skills might you develop? What perspectives might you gain? What strengths might you build? This isn't about being grateful for suffering, but about being intentional about extracting value from it. Meaning making. Consider how your current struggle might prepare you to help others who face similar challenges. How might your experience become a source of wisdom, compassion, or service? This transforms personal adversity into potential contribution. The compound effect. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of adversity-driven growth is its compound effect. Each difficulty we navigate successfully builds capacity for handling future challenges. Each obstacle we transform into opportunity increases our confidence that we can handle whatever comes next. Each experience of growing through adversity reinforces our understanding that challenges are not threats to be avoided, but opportunities to be embraced. This compound effect creates what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where people don't just recover from difficult experiences, but actually emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable than they were before. They develop greater appreciation for life, stronger relationships, increased personal strength, and often a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. The Stoic approach to adversity offers a roadmap for ensuring that this growth occurs. By maintaining focus on virtue, by accepting what we cannot control while taking action on what we can, by looking for opportunities to practice wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance in every situation, we ensure that no experience is wasted, no challenge is merely endured, no obstacle fails to contribute to our development. This is the great promise of the Stoic path. Not that life will be easy, but that every difficulty can be transformed into strength, every challenge into wisdom, every setback into a setup for greater growth. This is how we turn the inevitable adversities of human existence into the raw materials for human flourishing. Dr. Sarah Chen stands in the emergency room of a major metropolitan hospital during the height of a crisis. Around her, the controlled chaos of modern medicine unfolds. Monitors beeping, staff moving urgently between patients, families waiting anxiously for news. In the midst of this intensity, she moves with a quality that colleagues and patients immediately notice. A profound calm that seems unshakable, a steadiness that provides reassurance even in the most stressful moments. This calm didn't come naturally to Sarah. Early in her career, she was as reactive as anyone to the pressures of emergency medicine. But over years of practice, both medical and philosophical, she developed what she now recognizes as a Stoic approach to high-stress situations. She learned to distinguish between what she could control, her skills, her attention, her responses, and what she couldn't, patient outcomes, family reactions, system failures. This distinction allowed her to channel all her energy into being the best physician possible while remaining emotionally stable regardless of external chaos. Patients and families sense this stability and are drawn to it. In a world where emotional reactivity seems to be the norm, her calm presence becomes a beacon of possibility, proof that it's possible to remain centered even in the storm. This is what unshakable calm looks like in practice. Not the absence of challenge or the avoidance of intensity, but the capacity to remain steady and present regardless of external circumstances. In our hyper-connected, always-on, perpetually stimulated world, the ability to maintain inner calm has become both more rare and more valuable than ever before. We're bombarded with information, pulled in multiple directions by competing demands, and constantly triggered by news, social media, and the emotional states of those around us. The default state for many people has become a kind of low-level anxiety, punctuated by moments of acute stress. But the ancient Stoics, living in their own turbulent times, discovered principles and practices that can help us maintain equilibrium even in the most chaotic circumstances. They understood that external calm is not necessary for inner calm, that peace of mind is not dependent on peaceful circumstances, that we can be still in the center of any storm. Understanding true calm. The calm that Stoicism offers is not the calm of withdrawal or avoidance. It's not about becoming emotionally numb or intellectually detached from the world around us. True Stoic calm is actually a form of engaged presence, the ability to be fully present to whatever is happening without being overwhelmed by it. This calm has several key characteristics. Emotional regulation, the ability to experience emotions without being controlled by them. You can feel anger without becoming aggressive, experience fear without becoming paralyzed, feel sadness without becoming depressed. Emotions arise and pass through your awareness like weather patterns, noticed, acknowledged, but not necessarily acted upon. Mental clarity. When you're not caught up in emotional reactivity, your thinking becomes clearer. You can assess situations more accurately, make better decisions, and respond more effectively to challenges. Your mental energy isn't depleted by internal drama, so it's available for productive thought and action. Physical relaxation. The body follows the mind. When your mind is calm, your body naturally relaxes. Tension that you might not even have realized you were carrying begins to release. Your breathing deepens, your muscles soften, your nervous system shifts from fight or flight mode to rest and digest mode. Responsive rather than reactive. Perhaps most importantly, calm gives you choice in how you respond to situations. Instead of being triggered into automatic reactions, you can pause, consider your options, and choose responses that align with your values and serve your long-term interests. The science of Stoic calm. Modern neuroscience has validated many of the insights that the Stoics intuited about emotional regulation and mental stability. We now understand that practices like mindfulness meditation, cognitive reframing, and present moment awareness literally change the structure and function of the brain in ways that promote calm and emotional stability. Regular meditation practice increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function, emotional regulation, and rational decision-making. It also decreases activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system that triggers fight or flight responses. This means that people who practice these techniques become literally less reactive to stress and more capable of thoughtful response. The practice of cognitive reframing, questioning our automatic interpretations of events and looking for alternative perspectives, helps break the cycle of rumination and catastrophic thinking that keeps many people trapped in anxiety and reactivity. When we learn to see situations from multiple angles, we become less likely to get stuck in single narratives that cause suffering. Present moment awareness practices help interrupt the mental time travel that creates much of our emotional disturbance. When we're fully present to what's actually happening right now, rather than lost in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future, we often find that the present moment is actually manageable, even when it's difficult. Building unshakable calm. Daily practices. The development of unshakable calm is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice. Like physical fitness, emotional and mental stability must be maintained through regular exercise. The Stoics developed numerous practices for building and maintaining this capacity. Morning preparation. Each day begins with mental preparation for the challenges ahead. This might involve meditation, reading philosophical texts, or simply setting intentions for how you want to respond to difficulties. The goal is to establish your inner stability before the day's stresses begin. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people and challenging situations, but he would prepare himself to meet them with patience, understanding, and virtue. This mental preparation helped him maintain his equilibrium even under enormous pressure. The pause practice. Throughout the day, regular pauses help maintain calm in the face of triggers. When you notice yourself becoming reactive, take a breath before responding. This simple practice creates space between stimulus and response, allowing your prefrontal cortex to come online and enabling you to choose your response rather than react automatically. Perspective taking. When faced with stressful situations, practice seeing them from a broader perspective. How will this matter in a year, in 10 years, from the perspective of the cosmos? This practice, which the Stoics called the view from above, helps prevent minor irritations from becoming major disturbances. Evening reflection. End each day with honest reflection on what went well and what could have been handled better. This isn't self-criticism, but self-awareness, the kind of honest assessment that promotes growth and learning. Notice when you maintained your calm and when you lost it, what triggered reactivity and what helped you stay centered. Calm in relationship to others. One of the most powerful aspects of developing unshakable calm is how it affects your relationships with others. When you're not reactive, you don't get pulled into other people's emotional dramas. When you're not defensive, you can actually hear what others are trying to communicate. When you're not anxious, you don't create anxiety in those around you. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally distant or unavailable. In fact, true calm often allows for deeper connection because you're not so caught up in your own emotional reactions that you can't be present to others' experiences. You can offer support without taking on their problems, provide guidance without trying to control their choices, express care without becoming codependent. Calm people often become natural leaders, not because they seek leadership, but because others are drawn to their stability. In chaotic situations, people look to those who remain centered for guidance and reassurance. Your calm becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. Calm in the face of uncertainty. Perhaps nowhere is unshakable calm more valuable than in our relationship to uncertainty. Life is inherently unpredictable, and much of our anxiety comes from trying to control or predict what cannot be controlled or predicted. The Stoic approach to uncertainty is not to eliminate it, which is impossible, but to become comfortable with it. This involves accepting that uncertainty is a fundamental feature of human existence, not a problem to be solved. We can make plans while holding them lightly, prepare for likely scenarios while remaining flexible when unexpected events occur, pursue our goals while accepting that outcomes are not entirely within our control. When you're no longer fighting reality, including the reality of uncertainty, you can respond more skillfully to whatever actually happens. Your energy is not depleted by resistance to what you cannot change, so it's available for addressing what you can change. One of the most interesting aspects of developing unshakable calm is the paradox between effort and ease. Initially, maintaining calm in challenging situations requires considerable effort and conscious practice. You must remember to pause, actively choose your responses, deliberately practice reframing negative thoughts. But over time, this effort transforms into ease. What once required conscious decision becomes automatic. What once felt forced becomes natural. The practices that initially took deliberate effort eventually become your default way of responding to life. This is similar to learning any complex skill. Playing piano initially requires enormous conscious effort to coordinate your hands, read music, and produce the right sounds. But with enough practice, these actions become fluid and natural. The same is true with emotional regulation and mental stability. With enough practice, calm becomes your natural state rather than something you have to work to achieve. Calm as contribution. Perhaps the greatest gift of unshakable calm is that it becomes a contribution to the world around you. In a culture of reactivity, your steady presence offers an alternative model of how to be human. In a world of anxiety, your peace provides reassurance. In an environment of chaos, your stability offers grounding. This isn't about being superior to others or demonstrating your philosophical advancement. It's about recognizing that your inner state affects everyone you encounter and choosing to make that effect a positive one. When you're calm, you create space for others to find their own calm. When you're steady, you provide a reference point for others who are struggling with stability. The Stoics understood that we are all interconnected, that individual virtue contributes to collective flourishing. Your unshakable calm is not just a personal achievement. It's a gift to your family, your community, and the world. In developing this capacity, you become part of the solution to the epidemic of anxiety and reactivity that characterizes our times. This is the promise of unshakable calm, not just personal peace, but the ability to be a source of peace for others. Not just individual stability, but the capacity to contribute to collective stability. Not just freedom from reactivity, but the power to model a different way of being human in challenging times. It's 3 a.m., and Michael receives the phone call every parent dreads. His teenage daughter has been in a serious car accident. In that moment, everything he's learned about Stoic philosophy faces its ultimate test. All the morning meditations, the evening reflections, the practice of distinguishing between what he can and cannot control, none of it was theoretical preparation. It was training for exactly this kind of moment. As he rushes to the hospital, Michael notices something remarkable happening within him. Yes, he's afraid. Yes, he's worried. But underneath these natural emotions, there's a steady foundation that isn't shaking. He finds himself automatically focusing on what he can control, driving safely to the hospital, being present for his daughter, staying calm enough to make good decisions about her care. He's not trying to avoid his emotions, but he's not being controlled by them either. This is the moment when philosophy becomes more than intellectual exercise. It becomes a lived practice that makes the difference between being overwhelmed by crisis and responding to it with wisdom and strength. Every philosophical system ultimately faces one crucial test. Does it work when it really matters? Does it provide practical guidance, not just in calm moments of reflection, but in the chaos of real crisis? Does it offer strength not just when life is comfortable, but when life is falling apart? For Stoicism, this test is not hypothetical. It comes to every practitioner eventually, in forms as varied as human experience itself. The loss of a loved one, the betrayal by someone trusted, the diagnosis of serious illness, the collapse of carefully laid plans, the moment when everything you thought you could count on proves unreliable. These are the moments that reveal whether our philosophical practice has been merely intellectual exercise or genuine preparation for the challenges of human existence. These are the crucibles in which character is revealed, and philosophy is either vindicated or found wanting. Why crisis is the ultimate teacher. There's a reason why all great philosophical and spiritual traditions place emphasis on how we handle adversity. It's not because suffering is good in itself, but because crisis strips away everything non-essential and reveals what's truly foundational in our character and understanding. When life is comfortable, it's easy to imagine we're wiser, stronger, and more virtuous than we actually are. We can maintain the illusion that we're in control, that we've figured out how to live well, that we're prepared for whatever might come. But crisis has a way of revealing the gaps between our aspirations and our actual capacities, between our theoretical understanding and our practical preparation. The Stoics understood this, which is why they developed practices like premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This wasn't pessimistic thinking or morbid dwelling on worst-case scenarios. It was recognition that challenges are inevitable and that preparation for difficulty is not optional but essential. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his journal during plague and war, reminded himself, "Remember that very little disturbs the balance of the mind. Troubles are generally of our own making, arising from false beliefs about what's good or bad for us." But he wrote this not from a place of comfort, but from the center of enormous external pressures that would have broken a less prepared mind. The anatomy of a real test. Understanding what constitutes a genuine test of character helps us recognize these moments when they arise and respond to them more skillfully. Real tests tend to have several characteristics. They're unexpected. True tests rarely arrive when we're prepared for them. They come in the middle of ordinary days, when we're focused on routine matters, when our philosophical guard is down. This is why daily practice is so important. We need our principles to be so deeply ingrained that they operate automatically, even when we're caught off guard. They're personal. While we might handle abstract or distant difficulties with equanimity, real tests involve things we care deeply about. They threaten what we love, challenge what we believe in, or attack what we've worked hardest to build. This personal investment makes them much more challenging than theoretical scenarios. They require immediate response. Unlike philosophical thought experiments, real crises demand action. We can't think our way through them at leisure. We must respond in real time, often with incomplete information and under significant pressure. This is where our preparation either serves us or fails us. They continue over time. The most challenging tests aren't single moments, but extended periods of difficulty. It's one thing to respond well to a crisis for a few hours or days. It's another to maintain virtue and wisdom through months or years of ongoing challenge, preparing for the inevitable. The question is not whether you will face serious tests, it's whether you will be ready when they come. This preparation happens on multiple levels: philosophical preparation, regular study and reflection on Stoic principles builds the mental framework you'll need in crisis. Understanding the dichotomy of control, the nature of virtue, the relationship between external events and internal responses. These concepts must be so familiar that they become instinctive. But intellectual understanding alone is insufficient. The ideas must be internalized through practice until they become part of your automatic response system. This is why daily exercises like morning reflection, evening review, and mindfulness practice are so important. Emotional preparation. Developing emotional regulation skills through smaller challenges prepares you for larger ones. Every time you choose patience over irritation, courage over fear, wisdom over reactivity, you strengthen the mental muscles you'll need when stakes are higher. Practical preparation. This includes both external preparations, like having emergency funds, maintaining health, building strong relationships, and internal preparations,